Shalom and welcome to today's edition of Rabbi Ron in the House. Very special day. Have my son here, Ravi Shalom Goldberg, joining us for today's edition. And so just as Ravi got home and said, Ravi, let's have you as my guest today here on Rabbi Ron in the House, and asked him to take a look at the scriptures, the parsha of this week about Passover. Give it some thought and let me know what comes to mind. And so, Ravi, you opened up the scriptures, and one thing jumped out, just a little short and sweet. What was it?
I was looking at the Haftorah portion, and it talked about in Joshua, right after they had celebrated Passover, that he was looking at Jericho, and then he saw the commander of the Lord's army. And so I began thinking, after Passover comes encounters with God.
That's right. So here, when they went out there, he saw the commander of the Lord's army. What did he have him do?
Take off his sandals and kneel down.
And kneel down. And he had this encounter, and the scriptures make it clear that this was just after they celebrated Passover. Now, in the Exodus story, God had a Passover, and then they got to leave Egypt, and where did they wind up?
In the desert of Sin, I think it is.
Yep, and then you saw a similarity with something there that comes from Joshua. What was that?
Well, after Passover, they come to Mount Sinai. And there they stand at the foot of the mountain, and there the 70 elders come up to God, and it's this groundbreaking time where people can actually meet with God. And
and you also saw that when Moses met with God, what did God have him do? Similar to Joshua.
When he came, he said, "Don't come any closer. Take off your shoes."
And so both of them was a place, you're in holy ground in the presence of God, remove your shoes. Both of them were opportunities. Passover came, the people celebrated Passover, and then when the Passover celebration, after the Feast of Passover, that one day and the meal, they had an encounter with God, came into the holy presence where they were told, take off your shoes, you're in holy ground. That was the reason. When Moses went to Pharaoh and said, let my people go, and Pharaoh's like, why should I let you go? And he said, because God says he wants us to leave Egypt, get out in the desert, out in the country, so that we can worship him. We go to Passover, we get sanctified, we get delivered, we get redeemed. The purpose is so that now we can go, get out from Egypt to the world, and we can worship God, have an encounter with the living, holy God. And so that was what Ravi pulled out, what he noticed, what God showed him. And so we both wanted to share that with you today, that now that you've celebrated the Feast of Passover, the goal is that you're able to get out and have an encounter with God. Any closing words, Ravi?
When we have an encounter with God, we go into new territory. I mean, right after he had taken off his shoes, when you take off your shoes, that's where you're comfortable, that's where you live and where you work. And I think after that happens, they enter new territory. After Joshua took off his sandals, that's when they conquered Jericho and began to take over Israel. And just like when Moses took off his sandals and they brought him out of Egypt into new land, and they're on their journey to Israel, we enter new territory, new land, and new phases of our life after Passover when we encounter God.
All right, there you have it. One of the reasons to have an encounter with God, God wants to bring you on into something new. And so keep that in mind. Have your eyes and your ears open, listening to God, looking, expecting that to happen. And so thanks so much for joining us. This has been Rabbi Ron and Ravi in the house.